competition from the United States of America through trade agreements that undermine our export interests, demand maximum concessions, and openly aim to weaken and subordinate Europe, combined with an endless accumulation of new tariffs that are fundamentally unacceptable, even more so when they are used as leverage against territorial sovereignty.
Jake, clearly the Greenland issue is a hot topic at this summit, this time with what we just played with Lutnick, what we just played with Macron. How is the White House approaching Davos when there is so much tension? And as the president goes there, what's he hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, Anna, the president is certainly not approaching Davos with any level, of delicateness here. I mean, I think pretty clearly we've seen the posturing from the president and the White House in just the past few hours in terms of these videos being posted, these AI images of the United States claiming Greenland and Venezuela and Canada, seeing the president post all these screenshots of messages he has with foreign leaders where he's conversing back and forth with them. I've spoken with a handful of White House officials just about what exactly the strategy is right now as we're continuing to see what feels as though escalatory language from the president about seizing Greenland and purchasing Greenland. These officials continue to tell me at the White House that this is all about the president's posturing, all about him trying to go in with the upper hand here. And that is apparently the president's strategy. But this is, of course, against a backdrop of deep economic concern and turmoil among some of these foreign leaders. A lot, of course, of our longstanding European allies. Secretary Bessent, Treasury Secretary Bessent, in Davos, speaking a bit about the current state of the president's plan of purchasing Greenland. Take a quick listen to him speaking about that earlier.
Everyone take a deep breath. Do not escalate. Do not escalate. And President Trump has a strategy here. Hear him out, and then everything will be fine.
Anna, what we're going to be looking for over the next couple of days, of course, we'll hear from the president. It's going to be really interesting and notable who he ends up taking meetings with, who is the last European leader that's in his ear. On his calendar for now, we know that the president will meet at some point with the NATO Secretary General. Likely the topic of Greenland will be the center focus there. And the attempt from the European side will be to convince the president to de-escalate some of his demand on purchasing Greenland. We're already getting a little taste of how these conversations might go based off of what Trump is posting in terms of these private text messages with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, French President Emmanuel Macron. Of course, it comes after Norway posted the president's message about linking his Greenland push to his perceived Nobel Peace Prize snub. David, does this create trust issues and make communication harder between world leaders at a critical moment?
It does. It's extraordinary to post this kind of personal messages online. And they say it's a negotiating strategy, but it's really angering Europeans. I was in Brussels last month, and I just got a message from a European official there. And this person has taken a conciliatory tone in the past, but she's literally calling out the American political acceptance. She said this is a test for the American system. And she said that Trump's behavior is unacceptable. It's not about, troops or security guarantees. They're happy to add that to Greenland. But she said Trump wants the territory. Does the Congress accept such behavior? This official asks, and then they end this with Europe won't. So this is real anger, and this is becoming very visceral. And, who knows where this is going to go? Rick can say more about this, but, this is the future of NATO. And splitting NATO is something Vladimir Putin has dreamed of. And, we're watching that happen in front of our eyes.
Yeah, Rick, President Trump, he's trying to get these European leaders to go along with his Greenland plans with this tariff threat. But listen to what European President Ursula von der Leyen said about all of this today.
That geopolitical shocks can and must serve as an opportunity for Europe. And in my view, the seismic change we are going through today is an opportunity, in fact, a necessity, to build a new form of European independence. And this need is neither new nor a reaction to recent events. It has been a structural imperative for far longer.
Rick, President Trump talks a lot about American power and might, but if he pushes Europe closer together, less reliant on the U.S., does it mean America's influence is actually weaker, not stronger?
Well, Anna, of all the ways that Vladimir Putin has tried and dreamed of separating the U.S. from NATO, I think the one thing he hasn't tried or thought of is an American president invading a NATO territory and causing Article 5 to be invoked against the United States. That's what Trump is playing with here. David alluded to it earlier. I mean, it couldn't be more dangerous. It couldn't be less beneficial to the U.S. By the way, I agree with Ms. van der Leyen that Europe does have to take a greater interest in their own security. And they have. They've raised the amount that they're spending on defense. But this is a union. I mean, we always say NATO is the greatest treaty and union in world history. It probably is. I mean, it's 75 years old. It's kept the peace. And the U.S. has the anchor tenet of it, to use a term that President Trump would understand. It's really just unthinkable that he's doing this. Now, I think some of this is posturing, as your correspondent said. He goes for the kind of maximalist position and then settles for something in between. I hope that is what his strategy is.
David, in one of those private messages the president posted overnight, the NATO Secretary General said, quote, "What you accomplished in Syria today is incredible. I will use my media engagements in Davos to highlight your work there, in Gaza and in Ukraine. I am committed to finding a way forward on Greenland." David, what does that tell you about his strategy in dealing with President Trump?
His strategy is to flatter the president, and diplomats from all over the world have told me and other colleagues from MS Now that that's what the view is to play to his ego and promise to support him. But this is creating real tension and a real lack of trust. And I just, again, illustrate how unprecedented this is. It's as if Canada declared that it wants to buy or take over Alaska because it needs, Alaska to, for its defense. And then Alaskans don't have any right to decide that. And you hear these fundamental principles, and the European leaders talk about sovereignty. It's just the ability of the people of Greenland to decide what country they want to be part of. And so this is just so backward and against basic values that have been part of the NATO and the American-European alliance for so long. That's why the Europeans are so baffled and angry about this.
Rick, the Washington Post writes Trump's push to take over Greenland and unleash a trade war with European nations has sparked the greatest transatlantic crisis in generations. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I mean, in a sense, it's almost really the only crisis in generations. I mean, remember during Trump's first term, he was trying, he said they weren't paying their dues, which, of course, was a misunderstanding of how NATO operates. And so much of what's happened in the second term is things that somebody said, Mr. President, calm down. You can't do this. No one is doing that here. And the other geostrategic problem with this is that it undermines any influence we have over Russia or China. What did Russia do? Russia invaded a sovereign territory that they said they needed for their security. What does China say they want to do? We want to take over Taiwan because we need it for our security. Trump is handing it to them philosophically on a platter, and that's not good for the world or for the United States.
So when you're talking about him handing them what they want on a platter, what do you think is their reaction as they watch this play out? If you are Putin or Xi or Orban or Erdogan, what's going through your mind?
There have been a lot of stories this morning, Anna, about what's going on in the Russian press of people praising Trump for what he's trying to do in Greenland. They're praising it because it does give the same underlying rationale for their invasion of Ukraine. Remember, part of Trump's rationale for taking over Greenland is that Russia wants to do it and Russia will encroach on our security. Russia is laughing and praising Trump for doing this because it justifies the aggressive sphere of interest kind of diplomacy that they're showing in Ukraine and elsewhere all across Eastern Europe.
We played some of the pushback we're hearing from French President Macron, Jake, as President Trump is separately threatening a 200% tariff on French wine. What's that all about?
Yeah, look, Anna, I mean, the president, we've seen this many times, has leverage tariffs not just to boast economically, but to really at the intersection of a lot of different things here. In this case, it's all about the board of peace and this potential reporting that Macron wasn't willing to sit on the board of peace. The president saying, that's fine, we'll ratchet up these tariffs 200, 300, 400% on some of these U.S. imports here. The issue with that on it, I know we know this and we've talked about it a lot, but this threat of tariffs isn't just this like willy-nilly thing. This is something that directly impacts, study after study shows, the U.S. consumer. Tariffs hurt the American economy. It's also, we've seen from the president many times, he will make a threat like this. He'll even in some instances propose a threat of this effect of tariffs and then quietly walk them back because realistically it ends up hurting the American people. The question here is, of course, how serious is the president about this? We heard from the president making this threat earlier after getting off Air Force One. I think we have a sound of that we'll quickly toss to.
Do you have any response to President Macron saying he will not join the Board of Peace?
Oh, did he say that? Well, nobody wants him because he's going to be out of office very soon. So, that's all right. What I'll do is if they feel like Costo, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, and he'll join. But he doesn't have to join.
Anna, this is likely a posturing from the president to get Macron to come to the table when it comes to sitting on this Board of Peace. We don't know, of course, how Macron will actually respond to the president's threat there, but a serious threat talking about hundreds of % increase on these tariffs.
Yeah.